Hello and welcome to another session of Lessons from My Mother. We are on lesson number 46, reaching the half century mark, as they say in cricket and in every other sphere. So I'm glad I'm keeping consistent as much as I can. And look at what's happening with my hair. It's growing and it's patchy in the beginning and then it starts filling in over time. So there's nothing I can do to change this. But this is this is how I look now, and I'm supporting my home, my abode for now, which is Canada, and I'm quite happy being here. And one of the reasons for starting this series was because I live here now in Canada, and I miss my mother. And I miss everything that she's taught me, and I'm grateful that I remember so much of it. And I'm grateful that now that I'm at such distance from her, which is just across the Atlantic, but it's still a distance, even if you're living in the neighbor's house, even if you're your parents' neighbor, that's still a distance you have to cover. Um, that it gives me time away, and I'm able to think about all the wonderful things she's taught me and made me the person that I am today. Everything I am, everything I have is because my parents and obviously because of God. So, in that line, being a vigilant parent is something that my mother has practiced and also something that she teaches my brothers and their wives and teaches me. And hopefully, when I have children, inshallah, I'll be practicing the same things as the ones that she's taught us. Um, Let me start with a few examples. One of the examples that I've mentioned before, a few months ago, or maybe last year, was of my mother checking our bags when we used to go to bed. So she would, after dinner, she'd ask us to pack your bags and be ready for the following day. And we do it, but as children, we don't really understand the point of it. So we're like, oh, okay, yeah, I did this in social studies, I did this in history, did this in English, did this in blah blah blah, Urdu, Islamiyat, and then just go to sleep. And same in England. When we moved to England, it was nobody wants to look at their schoolwork when they're about to go to bed. They want to play around, they want to faff about, and then just go to bed when they're tired. So my mum would make us do this, and many times, if not 5 nights out of 7 every week, she'd sneak in after we've fallen asleep and she'd check each and every one of our bags and she'd open them up and she'd be like, okay, you got a 20 out of 20. Good. Oh, 16 out of 20. What is this? What is this? Oh, let me check his diary, because at that time, students were meant to write their homeworks in a homework diary and the teacher was meant to sign it. Yes, I know, ancient times. So she'd check the diary and say, he didn't tell me that he had to do this. He didn't tell me there was a project. He didn't tell me he needs to get this signed, that. And she'd check all our bags. My younger brother was too young, but the three of us were, I would say, from the age of 5 till 9, and then onwards, between 5 and 9, and then onwards, our bags would be checked. So much so that sometimes, if it was something glaringly obvious, she would wake us up in the middle of the night and say, "What's this?" And we're like, "What?" And she'd say, "You didn't tell me that you had to get the sign. What did you think was going to happen?" And I know today, particularly Western society, and because of Western society, a lot of countries in other parts of the world, particularly post-colonial countries, tend to imbibe Western values without thinking them through. So now they would say, oh, that is helicopter parenting, or that's too harsh, or that's too this. I disagree, and I don't disagree respectfully. I disagree vehemently, assiduously. I have severe concerns when it comes to Western society, and I'll get to that point, because the things that we used to love about the developed world are slowly dying. A lot of them are slowly dying, freedom and liberty being at the forefront. But I do believe that intense involvement in your child's life serves to your child's benefit, not to their detriment. Now, as always, I would be the first to say that there are always exceptions to the rule. So I would say 99% of the times, severe involvement in your child's life leads to their benefit. There are always 1%. There are always exceptions that say, well, my mother was this and my father was this and they ruined my childhood. Fair enough. But I push back to you and say, you are the exception, not the rule. And it's not about an imposition. That's why I was very careful with the word I chose. I chose the word vigilant. I didn't say be an imposing parent. I didn't say be a dominant parent. Vigilance does not require force. Vigilance requires attention and being alert and awareness, and then taking actions after that. My mother was fully aware of what was happening in our lives, and then she would choose, as the grown up, as the adult, of how to deal with it best. Sometimes she would let us slide. She was like, okay, well, okay, this doesn't warrant a beating or a severe reprimand or a talking to or a punishment. I trust my parents to be the judge of what punishment fits the child best. And that is how the world has functioned. I understand that in post World War II West it is remarkably different, and they're trying to change society, particularly after post structuralism. They're trying to social engineering society. It's not working very well for you, is it? I don't have the stats at hand, but I'm quite familiar with the stats. It's not really helping the family structure in the West, and that's trickling down to other parts of the world. So I hold the conservative, traditional standpoint. I'm not a liberal. Everybody knows that. I have my point of view, and I put that forward. So she would know exactly what's going on at school, because at home everything's in front of her. So she'd be like, I want to know what friends he makes. I want to know who he plays with. I want to know what he studies. I want to know what information he is consuming everywhere. So she'd come to pick us at school, and many times parents just wait in the car and they honk the horn and you run out of the gate. But my mum would come out of the car and she'd look for us and she'd call us over. I'm here, let's go. And while she would take us, she would say, who are you playing with? Oh, I was playing with Imran. Oh, call him over. And she'd shake his hand. She'd like, how are you? Where's your mum? Where's your dad? Where do you live? What do they do? Blah, blah. And she would ask them questions, trying to be friendly, and the kids would love it. But she wasn't only being friendly. She was being vigilant with what her child is being exposed to. So if she saw somebody who's eating a lot of sweets, and sweets are horrible for our teeth. They taste wonderful, but they're horrible for our teeth. So she'd observe it as a doctor. Oh, my mom has incredible powers of observation. Thank God. God bless her. So she'd observe it, and then a couple of weeks later or days later, she'd say, that Imran boy, his teeth are quite damaged. If he offers you a sweet, don't take it. And I say, but why? I love sweets. Yeah. I'll buy you sweets. Don't worry. But I want to buy you the right sweets, and I want to buy you the sweets and I want you to eat them in my supervision. I don't want you to damage your teeth. And she would counsel us all the time. And then she'd say, that boy or that girl, whatever their name is, that's a fine student. Maybe you should spend more time with them. Try to learn what they're doing in their studies and adopt those habits. Incredible habits. She would push us into being with people who have good habits. Because I think she understood very well that children are malleable. So if you put them around other children, they would develop friendships. You can't just leave the child alone and say, go make your own friendship. It's not a Jean Piaget experiment where you negotiate with the other person. You can guide your child. Not you can, you must guide your child. So she'd say, oh, you want to play cricket, right? Well, that boy is a very good bowler, or that boy is a very good batsman. Why don't you go befriend him or talk to him and say, hey, can I play with you next? Because team sports are very clanist. They're like a cult, as we all know. So they don't let a newcomer in until you prove your mettle. So one way, and if you don't have mettle, you never get in. So one way to do that is to befriend them and say, can I just stand field? Can I just do this? And she'd be vigilant. Oh, so Ollie's playing cricket now. Okay, that's a good sport. So after he's done his homework and his revisions, I can encourage him to play a little cricket rather than playing video games or whatever. Yes, I use the term video games. I'm sorry. I use the term video games. I'm an ancient relic. The same would happen so this is the mid-90s. The same will start happening when we bought our first computer. And initially the computer, this is like 1994 or something, initially the computer was just for my dad to work on. Soon after, we would get these things called a floppy drive. They would be the size of this, maybe slightly larger, slightly wider, and we'd stick them in and it would have games on. And slowly, well, before the floppy, there was the B drive and there were other things. So we would start playing games. So obviously, like parents do today, they limit their child's time with an activity that may not benefit them and may be damaging their eyesight or their minds or something. So my mum would say, I'm going to work, particularly over the summer. I'm going to work. You're supposed to revise X, Y, and Z. I'll check when I come back. And no games today. You can play when I'm back on the computer. And the computer was in a separate sliding room. A separate room divided by a slider. And me and my older brother were always the mischievous ones. So my older brother would go and he would play the game and I would play the game. And as soon as my parents would come, we'd switch the computer off and we'd run away. And we'd buy these CDs from the store and we'd just try to play around. And my mother would always know. Always she would know. And I'd say, how does she know we put everything back in place? Little did we know, and we only found out much later, that my mother would take a piece of hair and she'd put it on the keyboard. Like very strategically placed, that if somebody's playing, that hair is going to move. And she knew exactly, oh, it goes from the V to the J and then back to this, and then because they were thicker keyboards, so she could stick that in. And if we play, that would move around and she'd know. Imagine the vigilance. And we're like, how does she always know? That doesn't make sense. How would she always know? And then she said, as we grew older, she said, I have had these kind of traps or safety measures, not just for the children, but also for people who work around the house, because you employ somebody. Today we have CCTV cameras, so we can keep a good watch on a house. But you employ somebody who's not of your family or of your kin. You employ somebody who's supposed to do the housework and look after the kids. You don't know how they're performing. What if they're teaching your kids something negative? And that happens a lot even today. And that would happen prevalently. Well, I remember this very well. We used to have a housekeeper who had come to look after me when I was a baby. And she had insisted that I want to bring my parents with me from the village. They have to live with me. And my mom said, okay, we'll give you this room and you guys can stay there. And I think I was 3, and I started learning certain swear words. At 3, swear words are incredibly uncommon. And in my house, they're absolutely inexistent. My parents don't swear, ever. So we don't swear in our family. And at that time, I would start using these swear words. And my mom would say, he's 3, where did you pick that up? And she'd ask the housekeeper, and she'd say, oh, we don't use those words. No, ma'am, we never use them. She was obviously protecting her employment. So my mum would drop by unannounced then, because she'd be looking after me. And she'd be like, oh, where's the housekeeper? Why isn't she looking after Ali? And then she'd go to the quarters that were reserved for them, and she'd hear me, and she'd open the door, and I would be on the floor playing with slippers or just crawling in dust, because I'm not the housekeeper's child. So she'd leave me around and she was just resting. And her parents and her were using those words that I was picking up. They were using that language. And my mum opened the door and she said, what's going on? Oh, sorry. We didn't mean to. And she said, why did I employ you? I employed you to look after my child, not to do this. You're not even looking after the child. The child is exposing himself to things that are dangerous for him. And that lady was let go, obviously. And then future ones after that. So she'd keep a tight check on everything that was exposed, that we were being exposed to, that was around our valuable possessions all the time. She was very vigilant. And checking the bag is exactly that sort of a mindset. And when I was younger, obviously I would feel, oh, mum's being too harsh. Mum's borderline paranoid about things. Why is she this way? Oh, she's so strict. And as we grew older, we started realizing what a benefit that was. None of my brothers are alcoholics, including myself. None of us are alcoholics. None of us have ever gone into drugs. None of us have committed adultery, infidelity, or sexual harassment, sexual assault, nothing of the sort. None of us has gone to prison for any sort of crime, thank God. None of us has gotten into a bar fight or a street fight. There are countless things that undisciplined children who become undisciplined adults get into that none of us got into. It's not that I wasn't exposed to it. I have friends who would do all sorts of things. I would even go with them to those places, but the discipline was so strict and so clear in my personality because she had put it there. She had ingrained it in me that even around drugs, I would never use them. I said, no, no, no. So just one try now. And we know as parents, as adults, as children of parents, we know how easy it is to get into negative activities. You're sitting around with six friends, four of them are smoking a joint, or yeah, sorry, I didn't do it correctly. Four of them are smoking a joint, and they just have one swig or whatever it's called. And you're like, okay, I'll just try one. And before you know it, you're doing it regularly, and before you know it, you're dependent on it. None of that happened to any of us. Imagine that. So thank God. None of that happened. So I'm incredibly grateful because that harsh vigilance as a child protected us as an adult. Thankfully. Otherwise, I could have been drugged up and throwing my life to nothing right now. Thank you, Mum. Thank you, Dad. Thank you, God, that never happened, thankfully. Then I was watching this podcast. I think it's the PVD podcast. Shout out to Patrick McDavid. Good man. Really good man. And I think he was discussing Indian Americans and Asian American. Well, Indians are Asian American parents. So from China, India, perhaps even Pakistan could be counted in it. And they were measuring how successful this immigrant group is. Not probably, definitely the most successful immigrant class in America, if not in England as well. If you go to Oxford, Cambridge, if you go to the Big Four, the MBB, the ministries, the government, you see people from that part of the world dominating industries and academia and where performance is dictated, dominating all the time. In England, it's very probable that your financial services advisor is from East Asia and your medical advisor, your doctor or your nurse, is from South Asia. It's very common. Those professions are cultivated there, and we see them in the numbers. And those people have been observed and studied by demographic research scientists and societal analysts, and they've come up with certain attributes of, Asian Americans are the most successful immigrant class in America and the richest and so forth. That's where we see the Harvard scandal and so forth. They started figuring out why. They started asking children and they started asking their parents, and all the parents exhibited the same traits that my mom exhibited. We are mindful of everything that goes on in our children's lives, and we encourage them to share. We encourage them to tell us about our day. So if we pick them up from school, like, so how was school today? If the child just says, fine, really? What did Mrs. blah, blah, blah say? What did Mr. blah, blah, blah say? What did that student say? What did that student say? I remember you were playing with that kid. How's that? And they are so involved in the child's life. So, and they're monitoring the child all the time. They're observing out of love, obviously, but also out of vigilance and security. And they're watching the child and they say, my child doesn't seem as interested in activities anymore. I wonder what's up. Are they just growing up, or is there another reason? And they talk to the child again and again. Like, how is it? Let me take you to play this. Let me take you here. Let me teach you this. Let me show you this. And they would be so involved that as adults, we feel an incredibly strong bond to them and a strong sense of respect and love and deference and veneration and reverence, like I feel towards my parents. I can point out to you countless people from South Asia, from East Asia, from other parts of the world, non-Western societies, because that seems to have been dissolved or lost in the last 60 years in the West, but not where we come from, thankfully not yet. And that kind of shows us, because even now, the standards that I hold myself up to or students or employees or people I engage with or friends are standards that I've learned from my mum. So, punctuality, courtesy, respect, kindness, empathy. What's the word? The benefit of the doubt. All of them come from her. Hard work, being true to your word, delivering. Um, so many. Cleanliness. I've done videos and videos upon cleanliness. Order, organization, planning. All of those things come from that vigilant mindset. So inshallah, hopefully, when I become a parent, I intend on maintaining a very similar vigilance, very similar one, being 100% involved in my child's life, not 50%, not saying, oh, let them play, they'll handle themselves. No, I trust my child to learn to be independent, but as long as I'm alive, I will be creating a large protective field around them. The older they get, the larger the field gets. And I'm always mindful. And until they come home at night, I will stay awake and wait for them. I'll be very, very on top of how things are running in their lives, because I have seen the benefit of what it's done to mine, to my brothers, to other people who I've observed with similar parenting. So being a vigilant parent is something that she's taught us, but also something that she's demonstrated. We've seen her do it. And now, because we're of that age, we get to appreciate it truly, tremendously, completely. I'm ever so grateful, because my mum is a medical doctor and she also has an MPhil or PhD. She could have simply said, you know what, I'm really busy with work. I don't have time to look after 4 boys. I'm really busy with work. I'm just going to do this. But she found, I didn't even call it a balance. She was living 6 different lives, one with each child, then one with my father, and then one with her work, 7 maybe, her parents, and she was all involved in all of them. And she would find tremendous ways of including my father as well. So while she would hear the whole story from us, she'd give him the summarized version. And if she wanted him to be more involved, she'd say, why don't you go and talk to Ali about this? And we're like, okay, all right. And then he'd call me and he'd sit me down and he's like, your mom told me this, tell me more about that. So because it's different roles, if 2 parents are very hawkish, maybe, I'm not saying it does, but maybe it might get too much. So, and also practically speaking, she would pick us up from school and she'd talk to us more. And she is the mother, obviously. She has a different bond than the father. So she would engage my father when she deemed it necessary, not when we deemed it necessary. She'd be like, I've dealt with this problem in this manner, but maybe my husband needs to step in here. And then she'd call him over and he'd step in. So I'm really grateful to how I've been raised, thankfully. Thank you. I'm incredibly grateful to my mother and to my father and to my Lord for making me their child. So I think that's where I'll stop now, because I can talk about this for a long period of time. Anyway, thank you for joining me for another session of Lessons from My Mother. Being a vigilant parent is incredibly important. If you are a parent, a soon-to-be parent, or think about having children, perhaps consider what I've discussed here. And give some thought. You don't have to follow it. You don't have to oppose it. It's just how I've been raised, and I cherish it. Thank you. Have a wonderful week ahead, and I'll see you.